Hey everybody, this is Angelo here. Welcome to this adventure. This video is going to be a hell of an adventure. We're gonna have a man-to-man conversation about why for most gay men relationships are impossible and how to turn it around. So we're gonna talk about psychology here because that's the domain of relationships. Not hope, not wanting to be rescued by someone else, but psychology. And I hope that you're going to listen to me very, very carefully because there are a lot of myths out there. There are a lot of infantilizations, assumptions out there about relationships. And that's why for most gay men, relationships are impossible. So the only way to turn it around, and yes, it's not that difficult to turn this around, but to turn this around, we need to go back to science. We need to go back to psychology, to emotional intelligence, and turn this ship around once and for all. Are you ready to turn your ship around, to make your relationship successful? I hope you said yes, but first, we need to understand why, for most of us, relationships are so incredibly difficult. So let's begin. To begin this exploration, we will first look at assumptions. There are a lot of assumptions that we have about relationships. One of those assumptions that really gets us into trouble is that we believe that we have what it takes to make relationships possible. So in a situation where a man is, let's say, 40 years old, if that man has never opened books about relationships, about psychology, about emotional intelligence, that man assumes that he has inside him the knowledge necessary to succeed in relationships, to understand compatibility, to understand trust, to understand relatedness, emotional intelligence, sexuality, behavioral psychology. He assumes inside of him that knowledge has been given to him by someone out there, some angel, maybe some ghosts, maybe when he was dreaming, somewhere he assumes that knowledge was passed down to him. And so this is the most common assumption. We assume that we know what it takes to navigate our waters through the enormous, and I repeat, enormous, gargantual complexity and irrationality of human nature. So we could stop right here and we could unpack this for many hours to show that this is really the problem. This is really the reason. This is where we fall short. And this is what happened in my life in my 20s. I thought I knew what I was doing. And what happened? Two relationships that lasted 5 years each ended up in very strange breakups. Those men are no longer in my life. We don't call each other. We don't interact. Thousands of memories and interactions vanished into a black hole. And I then look really strange and surprised. What happened here? Well, what happened here is I had no clue what I was doing. And so that's what happens with most men today. They're just going out there and they are assuming they know what they're doing, but they have no clue what they're doing. And here is why. Our parents, our families, our teachers, our siblings, nobody gave us that information. Let me give you an example of how human development works. Did you know that little tiny babies, just a few months old, that if they are not shown how to stand upright and walk on 2 feet by adults, if they're not shown and taught how to do that they never learn and they end up crawling like animals? Did you know that? Now, that's an extreme example, but it illustrates how human beings learn. Let me give you another example. Have you ever met someone who grew up in a family where nobody said thank you, or I am sorry, or I love you, or good morning, or good evening, or good night? Have you ever met someone who grew up in that kind of environment, would you ever want to date someone who never says, I'm sorry? Would you ever date someone who never says, thank you, or who never says, I love you? I wouldn't. But did you know that most people today are surrounding themselves in environments where none of this is happening? Nobody is saying, I love you. Nobody is saying, I'm sorry. Nobody is saying, thank you. Nobody is saying, good morning or good night. Now, I may be exaggerating a little bit here, but I'm hoping that you're getting where I'm going with this. In order for relationships to work, we need to be shown how they work. Now, I know from my own personal experience with Frank has taken a long time to learn how to say, I'm sorry. There was a huge blockage in his psychology to be able to say, I'm sorry. This could have been all kinds of stuff, and we had a lot of fights over that. But finally, he learned how to say, I'm sorry. But many people never do. Many people never do. Many people assume that in their psychology, they have enough to make relationships work. I'm sharing with you these examples because they're very simple examples to illustrate what relationships require of us. Our teachers never gave us any information about gay relationships. Our siblings, our parents, nobody in the gay world gave us those I'm sorry's, those thank yous, those examples of how to behave so that we can quickly repair relationships, we can quickly step into a conflict and fix it. Nobody has shown us how that works. Now, straight people may have had a lot of that, a lot more, definitely a lot more than gay people. And I can just ask you to scan your life and to observe, did anyone show you how that works? Are you the first one to say I'm sorry when something happens, even though it's not your fault, but you just want the relationship to continue, so you basically take the high road and you say I'm sorry even though it's not even your fault? Have you ever done that? That's a good example to show who has the courage to actually step in and fix a relationship. How many times have you seen someone do that? How many times have you seen someone to step in courageously to say, I'm really sorry I hurt you, even though you didn't hurt the person, but you want the tension to go away? Now, these are examples of the behaviors that we should have had, that someone should have taught us, but instead we are basically like a blank canvas without any of the substances and any of the examples that teach us how to behave. And so we walk around there and we're surprised we struggle in relationships. We're surprised relationships go away every time we try. So the first thing in our understanding of why is it that we struggle so much, and why is it that for most gay men it's so almost impossible, is to recognize that our assumptions are wrong, that we assume we have something that's actually not there. It's simply not there. And obviously, once we accept this, then we can go out and grab it and get those behaviors and learn those behaviors. But still, that's something that most men are not willing to do. And we ask the question, why? Is it the stubbornness of the masculinity, or is it the gay shame that creates ambivalence, that creates simply, I don't care kind of attitude, which is really what's happening out there. Nobody cares, nobody wants to step in, nobody wants to take the higher road, nobody wants to pick up the books and really go out there and practice the leadership kind of behaviors that actually create relationships. We're going to talk about leadership at the end of this video, because this leadership, I believe, is really the essence of what it takes today. In fact, I coined the term compassionate leadership. That's what it's going to take for you to succeed. If you can't be a compassionate leader in the gay world today, I'm telling you, it's going to be impossible to succeed in relationships. So without going too far, too fast right now in this video, let's go back here and let's finish up with this assumption. We assume that inside of us, more inside of our heads, that we have the content, the examples, the strategies, the ways to make relationships work. Now, one of the important additional comments that I'd like to make here to really show you that this is really necessary, that the acquiring of knowledge is really necessary, is to show you that throughout humanity, human beings evolved in groups where behaviors were passed down from generation to generation to generation and all the way down to babies, children, and everybody else. That's how knowledge about relatedness, about compassion, about love has been passed down. If we don't have good relationships with our families, with our fathers, with our siblings, and this is mostly what's happening with gay men because of homophobia, our families never really understand us, so they kind of back away from us. So unfortunately, we don't have those strong relationships. And so because we don't have that, this is also the reason why none of this knowledge is passed down to us. We are simply, like I mentioned earlier, a blank canvas, and so we can't really make relationships work. We don't have what it takes. You may be super smart with computers. You may be an amazing business person. You may be a physician. You may be a lawyer. You may be someone who is extremely talented in another area of life. But if you've never had examples of behaviors, phrases, words, sentences exemplified to you by someone else, you just won't make it work. You just won't make it work. I recently had a disagreement with Frank. And in fact, that's what motivated me to create this video, because I saw in myself that despite all of my training, and I've done enormous amount of training on myself, I have evaluated all of my past wounds, all the traumatic events from my parents, from childhood, and I still get caught in this spiral of making it about me and being unable to step outside of it and resolve a conflict. And so I know if I get caught in this, I know most people are going to be caught in this and not be able to dig themselves out of those spirals of these very, very complex states of mind where we really destroy every relationship that's on our path without realizing that we are destroying the relationship because nobody has taught us how to solve problems. Nobody has taught us how to step outside of our ego. Nobody has taught us how to be more assertive, to let other people know what we want from them. We assume the others are just going to read our minds and give us what we expect they should give us, even though we never communicated to them. I mean, crazy, right? But these irrational states of mind are mostly the norm. They're the norm. And so that's also the reason why for most men, if they don't have the tools to dig themselves out of those holes, they will never succeed. And it gets worse and worse and worse as we age because we have a lot more of these negative experiences and we eventually lose hope, and then we don't even try. We don't even seek help to fix it. So this is the main assumption. We assume that somewhere in our psychology, we have the tools, that we know how to stand upright in relationships, but we actually don't. Nobody has shown us. Now, when we throw homophobia on top of that, I mean, gosh, nobody can succeed. When we are exposed to thousands and thousands of messages that being gay is bad, that as a gay man that we should die or go to hell, and when we hear those messages hundreds and hundreds of times, we eventually integrate them in our unconscious, and on many levels we feel that there's something wrong with us. And I'm going to share something with you that you may never have heard before, but I think this is happening a lot of times. We end up punishing ourselves with the struggle in relationships because we feel we are bad, and so nobody else punishes us as adults, so instead we punish ourselves by struggling and not looking for solutions and answers. That's just an extra spin on why the struggle is so real and is so cyclical and it never ends for most men. So now, once we have this assumption understood, then we go into myths. Now, out of this assumption that we know what we're doing, which in fact most of us have no clue, all kinds of myths come out, all kinds of irrational ideas. Sexual compatibility is one of the crazy ones. Also, that one day it will happen is also another myth. One day, somehow, in some serendipitous way, some angel will send a man to your environment, to your work. Maybe it's going to be a pizza delivery guy or something like that, and love will somehow happen. That's what people believe. People believe today, many gay men believe, that one day an angel will deliver love to you. Now, I'm all about law of abundance. I'm all about law of attraction, all of that. I'm all about that. And we want to be optimistic, but it just never works that way. And if people ran businesses like that, if people ran their lives like that, everybody would be in bankruptcy and people will be miserable. Now, a lot of people are in bankruptcy, a lot of people are miserable because they do base their life on hope and on just expectation that one day something will happen. So now, let's dig a little bit deeper into those myths. So we have sexual compatibility, very common myth, and it paralyzes people. It paralyzes them because it sends people into the wrong directions. Like, imagine kind of like going through a very complex city, and you've got all kinds of streets, kind of like a maze. And one of those steps is a maze that eventually ends up in you getting killed because there's a trap, there's some kind of dinosaur that's gonna eat you alive if you go that way. That's what sexual compatibility is. It's like this path, it looks really sexy, it looks really kind of cool, and it's inviting, and you get a lot of immediate satisfaction. But you always get eaten up by that dinosaur that's waiting a little bit down the line, hidden in the dark alley. That's how sexual compatibility destroys relationships. It's like relationships based on the ways that genitalia come together. I mean, come on. It's the most ridiculous thing. It's the most irrational thing I've ever heard. It's perpetuated by men who've never studied anything about sexuality or anything about relationships. Basically sexual addicts. And I don't want to be negative here. I don't want to be, bringing these men down. But for those men who are not sexually addicted, we got to clear this up once and for all. Sexual compatibility is not what you want. You want psychological compatibility, which is on multiple dimensions: cognitive, mental, emotional, psychological, readiness to have compassion, readiness to have intimacy, readiness for emotional openness. That's the kind of compatibility you want. Sexual compatibility, it's for animals. Animals, it's the primitivism, it's the tribalism, it's the assumption that we are living in 10,000 years ago, where nobody has any brains, nobody has any values, nobody has any purpose, aspirations, and vision, and the only thing that we share in common is how we have sex. So, of course, in a modern society, it always regresses everyone who bases their relationships on sexual compatibility. And you know what? I raise my hand and I regress too. I'm guilty of that for 10 years of my life in 2 relationships when the sex initially was great, but once the sex stopped, there was nothing left. It was an empty vacuum. It was like a vortex of a black hole. There was nothing there. And these men went separate ways. I tried to reconnect with them because at that time I was studying personal development and I wanted to take the high road and I wanted to practice leadership. I called them. I saw Eric a few times. I called him to want to stay in contact. But then it's like, no, there was no reciprocation. I was like, okay, I guess we will never be friends again. We will never be anything again. That's why in the gay culture, people say, after breakups, they end up never speaking to each other again. Not because they were not good for each other, it's simply that these men were basing their interactions and their relatedness on something so primitive, something so primal, and something so animalistic that it's not something that can be brought into the modern world and brings value to people's lives and can be extended into longevity. So anyway, I can go on and on and on about sexual compatibility. I mean, I get it. I understand the pleasure from sex. I do. But I understand the pleasure from trust. I understand, and I actually prefer to have pleasure that's an ongoing basis for 5 years, for 10 years with someone that I trust. That's the kind of pleasure I prefer to have in my life. Another myth is I just need to find the right person. The right person. The right person never shows up. The right person does not exist. What usually happens in relationships when they come together because there's a connection that's established. And the connection is not always with the right person. What we usually know is that when you study compatibility, the psychology of compatibility, opposites attract. Opposites. So people with whom you can have a lot of conflict, nasty conflicts that are gonna test you to your limits. These are actually the people that are good for you. And so in those situations, we never would say this is the right person because this person gives me everything I always wanted. In fact, when the person doesn't give you what you want, and then you need to discover, you need to rescue yourself. You need to give yourself what you need to give yourself. That's the right person. But it never looks that way at the beginning. So people never in their lives meet the right person. They create a relationship out of the grind that happens when the two people come together, when the synergy is created out of the work of bonding, creating trust, sacrifice, and actually narrowing down options. Most people think that relationships are places where you have freedom and expansion of freedom. No, just the opposite, which is why it's so difficult. You have narrowing. People narrow down your options. If you want to have an amazing relationships, you're going to have to stop doing all kinds of stuff that you used to be able to do, that you used to do without even thinking about it. All of a sudden, you meet someone and he says, you know what, if you want to be with me, for me to trust you, you got to stop doing this, you got to stop doing that, and you got to tell me that you love me, and you got to tell me I'm sorry and thank you and good morning and all those things that person will expect. And if you're not willing to do that, that person will be no more. That person will be no more. So relationships are about narrowing down, not expanding your options. Relationships are not places where we go to find freedom. Relationships are places where we create an emotional home that's different. And so the difficulty in this is that a lot of people are so incompleted on an emotional and on a sexual level that they are incapable of restricting their behaviors. And monogamy is a perfect example. Most people, I would say 99.9% of all gay men, I'm close to saying most gay men, of all gay men, have no idea how to create monogamy, and they're psychologically incapable of creating monogamy. Every man that wants monogamy is the very first one to break it. Monogamy is a psychological restriction. It's like telling someone to stop drinking coffee. It's like telling someone to stop eating their favorite food. I mean, can you imagine that? You enter into a relationship and you want someone to stop something that it gives that person so much pleasure, so much connection with themselves. It's impossible. We can't do that. Most people don't know how to do that because they are not completed by experiences that give them so much satisfaction that monogamy or their restriction is actually possible. So for example, for someone to be monogamous, they have to have so much sex so that when they're sitting at a coffee shop and they see someone's bulges popping out of their pants, they're not triggered by that anymore because they've hooked up hundreds of times before. They've had anonymous sex 1,000 times before, and by now they're just like, okay, I've done it. I don't need to do it anymore. And maybe then they're ready. By forcing monogamy by sheer willpower, impossible. It's impossible to sustain it. I mean, you can sustain it maybe for a few months, but one day you're gonna be walking down the street, some beautiful, hot, amazing guy is gonna give you attention, and you'll get into trouble. And then you're gonna have to lie about it. And that's why relationships end up being so difficult. People then lie, and then the partner doesn't understand that he has to lie because he asked him to do something almost impossible. He doesn't understand that, and he then breaks up with him, and the relationship ends. And what happens next? He has to repeat the same process with a total stranger, or maybe wait 3 more years to meet someone semi-compatible with whom he can repeat the same process over and over and over and over again. So this cycle of these irrational patterns is why relationships are impossible. You know, for many men, they don't have any training in self-management. They don't have any training in psychology. They don't have any training in emotional intelligence. They don't have any training in sexuality. In fact, they assume everything is about sex, and that's how they get into trouble. That's how men that wanted monogamy, wanted love and marriage when they were 15 years old, they dreamt about having a family, how for most of them, it will never happen in their lifetime. Never. And some men who wait until they are in their 60s to begin this work of self-exploration, self-examination, achieving breakthroughs, trying radically new behaviors, it's not enough time. Oftentimes, it's not enough time because there's just so much of this that it's impossible. It's impossible. So now that we understand the basis for what makes relationships very difficult for us, let's now look into the culture. Let's look at the places where we meet each other. Do they exemplify the kinds of behaviors that make it easy for you to connect? When you go on Grindr, the online dating websites, OkCupid, Match.com, most of those places, are you being taught how to say thank you, I love you, I appreciate you, I'm glad I met you? Or instead, are you being regressive? Are you being neotenized? Are you being sent down into the spiral of tribal and primitive ways of being that take the process of relationship creation even more into the dark space out of which it's difficult to dig yourself out? So look around you and ask yourself those questions. And I believe that this situation of the cultural regression that's happening in the gay culture is only getting worse and worse and worse. And so that's why I say that for most gay men who are never gonna catch on what's really happening, who are never gonna become aware of what they're really doing, relationships will be something that they will never attain for the rest of their lives. Before we talk about the solution to this crisis, let's talk about one more place that often trips us up and sends us into years of struggle. And that's the place of anticipation of our lovers to be better than us, to be stronger than us. So let me ask you this. When you imagine your lover, is that person stronger than you? Does this person have more money than you? Or is more beautiful than you? Or is younger than you? Or has something that you don't have that you want? That's the place that creates a lot of struggles because our list of expectations is so big that we almost never meet that person. And for a lot of us, a lot of these expectations should have been met by our friendships, by our best friends, our activity partners. But instead, we want to be rescued by someone, that one person that descends down from heaven or from some outer space and gives us the missing piece we always have been waiting for to receive. For a lot of men, this is really the mindset for relationships. They lack something in their lives and they want someone to bring that to them. And so that's why when you see a lot of the older men, they're looking for someone super young, or a lot of the men that don't have money, they want an older person to rescue them financially. So the codependency is created with that. And the codependency perpetuates the delay of having to give ourselves what we really need, ultimately. So these are some of the reasons that contribute to our frustrations in relationships that for some men, for in fact many men, create relationships or make it almost impossible to create relationships. And so now let's talk about the solution to all of this. It's actually quite simple. It's for you to become a compassionate leader. Let's break this down into two parts. First, the compassion, the second, leadership. The compassion is there for many reasons, not just there to practice spiritual practices. It's actually a practical tool to break down the sensation of shame and bring in the caring, bring in the necessity to be there for someone. For many gay men, shame has affected them on a deeper level, and it shows itself up usually through a very general a sensation of ambivalence, not caring. Oh, he's gonna break up with me. Yeah, I'm gonna find someone better. Oh, he's gonna break up with me. He's gonna regret it later and then call me later, and then I will reject him the first time, and then he's gonna call the second time. Maybe I will accept him the second time. In reality, he will never call. He will never try again. And so we miss out on amazing relationships because we ourselves, we simply don't care. We don't care. Shame is when people hear shame, it's kind of difficult to understand. Translate it quickly into ambivalence, not caring, kind of like this this nonchalant, ambiguous lack of thought about love and relationships. That's what shame is. Shame causes people to negate hard work with relationships. And so compassion is one of those things that melts away the shame, because once we are compassionate, when you look at a man, recognize his struggle, you start asking the question, why is he struggling? Oh, he's struggling because of this, and the other, and those things that he's struggling with, I also struggled with. And so compassion immediately connects us together based on the struggle that's very common for gay men. We basically all struggle with the same thing. There are almost no differences. All of us struggle in relationships. All of us struggle in reinventing our lives. All of us struggle with happiness and success a lot more than straight people. So we can, through compassion, link ourselves to the struggles with the men in front of us. This is helpful because we don't judge them. We don't evaluate them anymore. We don't condone them. We don't make them bad or look bad in our evaluation when they have kinky sex or strange behaviors that we object to. Compassion melts away that kind of friction that oftentimes stands between gay men. And then leadership comes in, and that's the activator for you to step in. If you want relationships for the rest of your life, you're gonna have to have the courage to raise above and beyond what you used to do. And unfortunately, nobody's gonna show you how to do that. I can't demonstrate it to you right now because this is not a place where I can even do that. And so these behaviors cannot be shown unless you know a gay couple and you are in their kitchen and the living room and they are actually showing you what leadership is about. When one person is causing a fight and the other person, for the sake of peace, he just neutralizes it with certain phrases, with certain words, with certain gestures, with certain body language. That's what leadership is about. One person wants to leave the house and slam the door, and the one who's the leader, he actually chases him and stands in front of the door and shows him, you are not going anywhere. You are not leaving. I love you. I'm here for you. You ain't going nowhere. That's what leadership is about. And it's not going to be generated out of the patterns of behaviors you've seen in your life. This is something you're going to generate out of sheer creativity, out of even what you've seen in the movies. You're going to have to experiment with this leadership. Without this leadership, relationships will result in walkaways. Your partner will walk away or you will walk away. Your ego will dominate. Your ego will take over you, and your wounds from the past will be triggered. Insecurities will show up, and you're going to say to yourself, the hell with this. he is not respecting me, I'm gonna walk away and find someone better. No, you won't. That better person does not exist. And that's the truth. Unfortunately, those men that we want, that are gonna be there for us, I'm sorry to tell you this, they don't exist. They don't exist. You have to be the one who's there for them. You have to be the one who's there for them. This is the only way inside of this culture, this environment that we live in, where nobody is shown how to fix relationships, how to take the higher road, how to exemplify I'm sorry's, apologies, thank yous, and love yous. Nobody shows this. You're gonna have to show that. You're gonna have to role model this in your life. You're gonna have to step in at places, in situations and moments when your ego is gonna want to run away and walk away. And for most gay men, this kind of mental gymnastics, it's impossible. It's impossible. Because this is the kind of mental gymnastics that's all about kind of like one day stopping drinking coffee. One day, sometimes drinking alcohol, a glass of wine, and then stopping that. That's the kind of mental gymnastics that we are talking about here. That's the kind of leadership behavior that we're talking about here. For most people, this is going to be impossible. It is only possible when you in advance prepare, and when you practice this with your friends, when you practice this with your family. That's why in many training courses and transformational educational places, they always say, fix your family relationships first. If you don't have the agility, the mental gymnastics to fix those relationships, when your loving relationship happens and will demand that from you, you will not know how to behave. You will not know how to act in that situation, and it will end. And that's what happens for most men. So the way to practice this compassionate leadership is not to walk away, even if you want to walk away, even in situations when it makes sense to walk away, even in those situations. Because the gay culture has not produced exemplary men that know how to behave. Someone has to step in and show their leadership. And if you want a sure way to have love for the rest of your life, this kind of mental gymnastics is the answer. And this mental gymnastics is a protocol of behavior that will be produced out of a lot of work on yourself. Self-examination of your self-esteem, self-examination of your wounds, triggers, insecurities, emotional places of chaos from the past. From those places, once you process that, you enter into a cleaner slate, and out of that cleaner slate, that mental gymnastics and that compassionate leadership is possible, because to make it possible, we have to step outside of making it about ourselves. We have to step out of that and making it about the big picture. And very few people know how to do that. So in this video, I hope I showed you why relationships are impossible for most men, but also how to turn this around. You can succeed in relationships. Yes, you can. It's in theory, it's actually quite simple because we have the science. This is not some kind of rocket science. It's not some kind of place where nobody has ever investigated it. We have such enormous research into this area that we today know for sure how this works. But the question is, do we have what it takes? Do you have what it takes? Do you have what it takes? I want to challenge you to say, yes, you have what it takes. You can make this happen, but you got to prepare for it. You got to study psychology. You got to study the places of relationships, of relatedness, of sex, of compatibility, of conflict resolution, assertiveness, communication. That's when you're going to be ready for love and relationships. And everybody else will be like those babies that will be crawling on the ground and never learn how to stand upright. The good news is that we know how to make relationships work. You just need to choose to want good relationships and then ask the question, how do I make it work? And go out there and grab the resources that make it possible. And for those of you that want to expedite the process, the Big Gay Family Social Program is a perfect place because it gives you the extraordinary practice lots of introductions, resources, coaching programs so that you expedite the process of learning and mastery. Instead of doing it by yourself over the course of 10 years, you can just do it within 1 year inside of a private social program. Those of you who want to try that, please visit the website biggayfamily.com. So I hope this has been helpful for you. For more videos about the psychology of sexuality, relationships, connectedness, just in general issues related to gay life, please visit my website at paulangelo.com. And until we talk in the next video, as always, my friends, go out there, think big, stay present, and be a leader in your life today. Signing off, talk to you soon.